Hi, Father Ian Van Heusen here. This is the Art of Living Well. I'm here with Dr. Greg Bottaro, and we're just going to have a little bit of a conversation about the spiritual life, about the integration of spirituality and psychology. So, Greg, thanks for being here with me. Does that
Sounds
work?
great. It's awesome being here with you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Hey, so tell us a little bit about yourself. So, where are you from? What's your job?
Sure. So I live in Connecticut. I work outside of New York City, and I am a Catholic psychologist. So I've developed and run a practice. It's now a group practice. We have 11 other therapists. We're in 6 offices, and we do a lot of online therapy as well, all centered around this idea of integrating the Catholic faith with the practice of psychology. So we're all either have doctorates or masters in psychology or therapy, being able to do sort of just regular, run of the mill licensed psychotherapy, but we do it with a foundation based in Catholic anthropology, coming from a lot of training with philosophy and theology and spirituality from a Catholic perspective. So that's kind of what we do. And then out of that, we're creating all sorts of other resources, trying to engage people at the deepest human level. My sort of obsession has become moving the needle for people in their lives, like not being satisfied with just putting out a good post or, having a good, course online or something like that. I'm now really trying to figure out like what moves people, and more so than just like what the ideas are in the head, but how do we actually move from the heart and the emotions and the will so that people make those kinds of changes in their life.
Yeah. And, piggybacking off of that, you might want to look into, there's a great line in the Army's manual for officer training. It says, a leader is to provide purpose, direction, and motivation.
Awesome.
So I think that's a good summary. And I agree with you. I think we're both at a point where we have a good set of ideas. We know the ideas are solid, but the question is like, how do you motivate changes in behavior? And how do you motivate people to grow? So kind of building off of that, why don't we get into our first topic, which is healing and integration. We kind of brainstormed a little bit before. You had a story that would kind of flesh out some ideas, and I had a story as well, how this integration and healing takes place. So why don't we jump in a little bit? Do you want to start with your story, and then we can...
To tell you the truth, I forgot what my story was.
Oh, dang. Okay. You forgot what the story is. Let me see if I can jog your memory. So
was there a specific story that I told you?
There was. I should have wrote it down. I'm learning that when I'm brainstorming with people. I'm like, how am I going to remind you? Was there a particular prayer experience where you would say you were doing a holy hour, or you were something in particular?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we're jumping in real deep here. So this is like as deep as it goes. I started off, didn't start off. I was at one point a Franciscan friar. Yeah. And so my own journey to like understand how God was leading me to live my life went through this period of time. 3.5 years I was with the CFR Franciscan Friars of the Renewal in New York. And I started off like really joyful. It was like all in. I knew I was supposed to be there. And that itself was the fruit of like 5 years of discernment. Oh, wow. So it was long and hard earned. And like I said, I jumped in with like tons of joy. It felt like all my prayers were answered, and I kind of figured it all out. And now I was going to live this awesome life of joy and happiness with God. And that was true for like the first 2 years. Yeah. And you go through these different stages. And so I made it through novitiate, which is a year long and a really hard stage. Like they really test you. You spend 365 days not getting a single moment's break from the other brother novices that you're with. Yeah. So like in normal life, if you get like sick and tired of who you're living with or what's going on at home, or like hard day at work or whatever, it's like, oh, I'm going to just go grab a beer with a buddy or whatever. Like that's kind of normal. Well, in novitiate, that doesn't happen at all. You like never get that break. So you're locked in for a year. I went through that with flying colors, and I was still joyful when I left. And so it was about 6 months after that I started to like feel less joyful. And then that progressed into real discomfort, like starting to doubt myself, starting to feel burdened by the life. And then that progressed to the point of like real misery. And I was waking up each morning almost in tears, some days actually crying, putting on my habit, feeling like I was living a lie, because I know I was supposed to be like proclaiming the joy of celibacy and living in this kind of relationship with God. And I felt like it was just a total lie. And I couldn't even at one point like stomach putting on the habit anymore. So I was in a lot of turmoil because I knew everything in my head. I had gotten myself to where I was because of a lot of this intellectual pursuit. I had read JP2. I had read about St. Francis. I had read, about the spiritual life, and I was living it on a certain level. And what I didn't realize was there was so much pain locked into my heart because of where I have come from. My parents had divorced when I was 17. And I didn't realize until later how much that had motivated a lot of that initial drive. And I was really kind of like running away from the fear of a disastrous marriage. And I was smart enough to know that like marriage is a holy thing, like it says sacrament, and I was all in on the church teaching, but I wasn't emotionally connecting with that possibility for myself. So celibacy seemed like the right answer, and the Franciscans are awesome, and I love the friars, so I was like all in. But as I was spending all that time actually in adoration, actually praying the Liturgy of the Hours, actually learning how to meditate and contemplate, and having somebody like Father Benedict Rochelle, an amazing psychologist priest and real expert in spiritual life, guide me, those wounds started to heal. And as those wounds healed, my need to run away lessened. And then the life became really grueling because it wasn't actually what I was made for in my core. So that all came to a head. At one point, I was on this retreat, and I had been up and down in my discernment. I was pretty sure I was supposed to leave, but I didn't have freedom yet. I was afraid that I was going to regret my decision. And I was like, okay, I know I need to leave, but like 10 years from now, am I going to be second guessing myself? And I was frustrated. I was in this tiny chapel with the tabernacle alone. And I was like, all right, Jesus, I'm going to do some scripture roulette here. I'm just going to open up to the page, and you're going to tell me what I need to hear. And I opened up to the page, and I don't remember the line, but it was something about freedom will come from like following your family line or something like that. And I was like, that's it. I have to like own it, like go deep, like just go into my family line. Like that means I'm going to get married and da-da-da. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is the book of Leviticus. No, it's like, so I'm supposed to be a priest? Like, and then I got so frustrated, like the deepest, rawest frustration with God I've ever felt. And I took this Bible, and I do not say that this is okay. Don't do this. I'm just being raw and honest here with what happened. I whipped it across the room, like barely missed the tabernacle. Mm-hmm. And I was just in utter desperation. And I just started to like pray from my heart like I've never prayed before. And I was so mad at God. And I was saying, you made me. You made this heart. You made this mind. You know how I think. You know that I'm going to overanalyze everything. You know that the scripture roulette's not going to work. Why won't you just speak to me in the language that you know I'll get it? And like really raw. And then I just like bawled, like my heart opened up, and it was like this outpouring of intense emotion and pain. And after like 20 minutes, I just sort of like collected myself, and then I went out of the room. And if any of your listeners are familiar, this retreat was actually the Theology of the Body Institute's Head and Heart Immersion course. And I was there on the prayer team, but it was their course number 1, where they show a movie, The Truman Show. So I go into the room where everybody's watching The Truman Show, and all I can say is there was basically a mystical experience that God put me into. And it was like I entered into the movie. Mm-hmm. And as Truman is, I won't get into the details of the storyline, but basically there's a part where he has to like escape his false world that's built around him. And as he goes into this boat and he's going across this water, like I'm like basically connecting with him as a character, and I'm feeling every nuance of emotion that he's feeling until there's a point where he like hits the wall, and I felt it was like soul shattering. Like when he hit the wall, I hit a wall inside of me, and then there's that frustration, and then he sees the stairs and he walks up, and then the voice comes from the sky, and it's this temptation, and he's like, this world is so safe. This is where you need to live. I'm going to take care of you here. From that, that evil one voice coming from the sky. And it was like all relating to my life. And then he just decides, I'm out of here. And he opens the door and he walks through. And when he walked through that door, it was there's just, again, the depths of my soul, the weight lifted, the cloud lifted, and I just entered out into my freedom with Truman out that door. And it was like night and day different. The clarity and peace and freedom that I had. God did it. He used the movie, and for whatever reason, like an artistic expression of truth and beauty and goodness, like really moved my heart in a really simple and direct and clear way. And it freed all that wound, all of those blocks in me. Mm-hmm. And I left that retreat, and I had the greatest joy and peace about leaving the Friars. And it took another like 6 months before I actually left. But since then till today, that was 2007. So 12 years ago, I had never had a second where that peace or joy has left me. And it was the experience was so profound that there's this difference between reading and praying and spiritual direction and like the things we know we have to do, and we have to do them. Like I had to do those things, but all of those things serve a purpose to line us up to be in an actual relationship with the living God. Mm-hmm. And it's in the encounter of the relationship that we actually change.
Agreed.
So when that happened, it was like it all became clear. Like it all made perfect sense to me. And actually, and as a psychologist, I say this like ironically, but like at the end of the day, therapy is just another one of those things. Like it really won't matter.
Yeah.
Unless
it leads you to that point of conversion, so to speak.
Exactly. It's like it's an important component. It matters, but it's not going to be the thing that will like bring you across the finish line. It's going to be grace and relationship with God that brings you across the finish line. And so I think that encapsulates for me what I mean by integration.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I want to come back to a little bit to talk about integration a little bit, but kind of fleshing out a little bit of the things I heard you say was the one thing that really struck me early on you were talking about was that you knew the theology, you had the correct ideas, but there was the subconscious kind of, or maybe lack of a better term, component of why you were doing what you were doing.
Right.
I think that's an important quality to remind people of is, I mean, I even had one time where I was posting about something where I was like, we don't truly know why we do what we do. And somebody says, well, I know exactly why I do what I do. And it's like, maybe you don't have some self-knowledge.
Yeah. But why did you post that?
Yeah, exactly. But it's kind of funny because if we're honest with ourselves, there are often reasons that are motivating our actions that are below the surface. And then what I found as a seminarian was every year a new door would open in my heart. Normally on a retreat, it was like my annual retreat tended to be when that would happen, but it would happen other times as well. But every year that there would be an opportunity for growth. One particular story that stands out, it was actually funny. So I'd had a lot of intense retreats where I would concentrate on prayer. I would cut off all my senses and I would, spend time in solitude. And those were really good retreats. But I had one retreat my deacon year where I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this completely different. I'm just going to have fun. So like I listened to music the whole time, was on my phone. Like I was on my phone listening to music, walking around, listening to like Bob Dylan and all these different things and not like being super serious on the retreat. And I had this one meditation. It lasted about 20 minutes. And I was just super relaxed. I was like, I'm not even being serious. I'm not I mean, I took things seriously, but my personality is I tend to be more on the intense side, that everything's really serious and intense. So I was like, I'm just going to, have fun on this retreat. So this one particular meditation, I started thinking about soccer. I was like, I used to love just kicking the ball against the wall and just kicking the ball back and forth over and over again in soccer. It's like, let me play soccer with Jesus. I was like, this is kind of a little silly. It felt a little silly at first. So I was playing with soccer with Jesus and just imagining, and then it opened a whole door in my heart, because I realized when I was a kid, I had a lot of struggles, a lot of intense anxiety. The only time I didn't feel that way was when I was kicking the ball and playing soccer. And so immediately it opened a door. And then for the first time, I can't really get into the full way because it's really personal. I was able to address a memory in an area of woundedness, like in an instant, something I'd been avoiding for years and years that I would never admit to myself or to anyone. And I processed it in the course of a few minutes, talked about it with my spiritual director, and bam, it was like a huge, and I came off of that retreat ever since then, feeling like I could conquer the world. Because it was like, I dealt with the deepest, darkest demon in my heart, and it happened quick. I mean, maybe it won't happen always quick for people, and what I found, it also has been a great grace, is now as a priest, and I'm sure you deal with this a lot as a psychologist, is seeing people open their hearts on those areas of woundedness, things that they've never talked about, and seeing them deal with them for the first time.
Yeah.
And that's powerful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and that's it. It's going to those places like that we're carrying around that are so unconscious to us. And we're walking around with this stuff all the time.
Exactly.
And you can understand this neurologically. I mean, there are patterns of relational behaviors that are imprinted into our neurology, that are literally formed in our brain biochemically and through electrical impulses that are just pre-established patterns. And they're changeable.
Yeah.
But we have to look at what they are and accept the fact that they're there and understand where they came from. And then, like you said, process it. And it can be an instantaneous kind of experience if you're going towards it with awareness.
Yeah. And when the difference between a lot of it, where we were able to come to that aha moment, is we were literally doing hours, both of us, you in formation, me as a seminarian, doing hours of mental prayer meditation and examining our interior life.
Yeah.
So I think that's also maybe a key thing to bring out, is that there is that kind of training of the brain.
Yeah.
It makes, and over time, which it makes is incredibly important.
That's why those components are there. It's like, it's kind of like, it's like a Karate Kid. Like, you got to do the wax on, wax off. Like, that's not the fight, but that's like the training, and it's going to create that muscle memory. And then it moves you into that space where when it comes down to the fight, all of a sudden you're like, doing whatever you need to do to actually figure things out.
Well, in that muscle memory, it's interesting drawing that connection with mental prayer meditation. And also I'm learning the Latin Mass right now, or even learning the Mass. And a big part of learning those things is you have to get the muscle memory, because it feels awkward at first, just the movements. And so you have to get so I don't think people realize it's funny. You cite this in your book on Catholic mindfulness, and it's a big part of the mindfulness literature, but it's also a part of the Catholic tradition, which is that the emotions are tied to the body.
Right.
And actually, St. Thomas Aquinas would say they're tied to the heart. He actually says that in the Summa, and that the emotions are tied with the physical beating of the heart and the physical movements. And so that's a big part of that healing, is that when you're experiencing memories, when you're experiencing things, there's a physiological bodily sensation that's connected with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, that's good stuff. So yeah, I think, kind of ending this first segment, this was a good first segment, is that the integration and healing is kind of somewhat analogous to physical training and physical healing. Like you're having to train your thoughts, train your body as well. And then leading to that moment where the grace takes over and there's an illumination, So, I mean, I think the dangerous would be is it's not all us. It's not all us doing. But on the same hand, it's not just sit back and magically one day.
Right. And it's not just sit back and just read stuff or just like listen to great talks or, you know, like there's this idea out there that, that like books can change your life.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm like starting to dig into that and challenge that a little bit. Like I think about it, it's like, how many books have actually changed my life? I mean, the only book that could change our life is not a book, but a person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then even then, if the book changes your life, it's because of that moment where you integrate it in solitude.
And this is what I was thinking. Like you can't architect a book that's going to change everybody's life. Like it's not the book that's doing the life changing. It may be the case that a book kind of fits into a constellation of factors that does change a person's life. That may happen at some point where a person reads a book and they're like, it all makes sense now. But we'd have to be able to factor in all the variables, like the people that are in that person's life, the conversations that came before it, the experiences they had afterwards. It's not the book itself on its own. And because what is a book? A book is filled with ideas. And ideas are of a spiritual nature. And we are not spiritual beings. We are embodied spiritual beings. So we cannot be moved like the angels are, where they integrate an idea and they're moved. And, you know, that's how we could look at like the fall of the third of the angels or whatever. Like it was an idea that moved them. Or maybe there's some stuff in Aquinas about the communication of angels. Yeah. And they're like, it's like all this realm of idea. But for us, the realm of idea is only half of the picture. So whatever we're taking in books, whatever we listen to in talks, whatever we listen to, like all this awesome stuff, there's great Catholic content out there, but it's not enough, which is why like my thing with Catholic mindfulness is if you look at abandonment to divine providence, it's the spiritual work that undergirds a lot of the same concepts that I directly talk about in Mindful Catholic. But in any time I've read Abandonment to Divine Providence, when I'm reading the book, like in that moment, it makes perfect sense to me. And it's like, okay, this is amazing. Like we can trust God. He's the Father. There's nothing to worry about. Anxiety all but disappears. And we're totally happy and peaceful and free. And then you put that book down and like a week later, we're back at the rumination grind. And it's like, this stuff's not going to, you know, pan out okay. Or this is a problem. That's like, we forget all those ideas because we only receive the idea. It doesn't actually change our life until we put into practice something experientially that makes sense of those ideas. So that's why Catholic mindfulness is, the book is fine. Like read the book, but then do the exercises. Mm-hmm. Sit in prayer. Actually open yourself up to the presence of God. It's not just like because we owe it to him. It's because this is reality that changes our brains and our hearts and our spirits. So like that's what we need to do to actually make this real.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And actually I'm thinking I want to change direction slightly, not from what you're saying, but from what I had planned. In this second segment, kind of transition, I think what we could talk about a little bit is how do people actually change? Because what it seems like you're getting at is you have this great book. It's doing well. It's successful. And it's having some impact on people, but it's not always having the full impact that you would like to see. You're kind of brainstorming, how do I maximize impact? And I've started to realize this even with my teaching on prayer and meditation. I have a certain audience online, but what I've started to see is the real fruit is often in relationships. And you refer to it like that network of factors. And what I'm starting to think is maybe this is the wisdom that needs to be translated into some kind of contemporary movements of the religious order, right? So St. Ignatius, how did he form people? How did St. Francis? It's like they live with him, you know, the whole Jesus, come and see, live with me, discipleship. That's kind of a big thing, is like that discipleship-based evangelization. So you disciple people, you walk with them. And I have seen that in myself and other people. So when I was in seminary a lot, I had to say things like 20 times before I really understood them. And I would just sit with a mentor because I wasn't good at just taking in lectures. I don't think most people are. And I would have ideas and they would seem crazy to me. And I just had to like say them out loud and process them. And I do this a lot with people. And it's funny now being on the side of the priest, I'll hear people process these ideas and they're saying it for the first time. They're like, this idea is crazy. It's like, no, actually, that's pretty standard Catholic theology. You're just now kind of discovering it in solitude, which I imagine that's also a big part of the therapy kind of dynamic is where people are expressing things and formulating their ideas.
Yeah, it's definitely connected to therapy. I think that's one component of a multitude of components that we could understand more from the field of marketing.
Yeah.
Something that I'm really getting into as well is like learning the skills and the data from marketing research.
Yeah.
And this is what kills me is that like we have a psychology, we have a human psychology based in our anthropology. It just is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, like we could debate it all day. Certain observations about human psychology. So Apple or Nike or Google is researching the human person.
Yeah.
Like their life depends on it because it does. Like that's the lifeblood of their whole existence is understanding the human person.
Mm-hmm.
So they understand what the human person is revealing of itself through data analysis and observation. And they're using that knowledge to their benefit to sell more, whatever. So we come up with these marketing principles like urgency, scarcity, authority, social proof, or social accountability. And these are all different things that Apple will know how to expertly use to their advantage. Meanwhile, us in the church know nothing of any of this.
Yeah. Can you back up? Can you repeat those again? I just want to.
Just a handful, but I said urgency, scarcity, authority, social proof, or you could call it testimonials, and social accountability. So that's just a handful here. So if we look at all these things, like scarcity, like think about it. You're going to give a talk at your parish, and you're like, hey, everybody, this is like post-mass announcements or pre-mass announcements. You're letting people pray in the presence of the Eucharistic Lord and after Mass. So you do your pre-Mass announcements, bulletin announcements, whatever it is. And you're like, oh, we're going to have a talk on Thursday night on XYZ. Please, everybody come. Like, okay, 4 people show up.
Yeah.
You could have this, and it could be like the most amazing, life-changing, like awesome experience of an event, right? Well, if Apple came in and we're like, okay, we're going to do a launch on Thursday, like this is how we're going to approach it. They would be using those principles.
Yeah.
And so why is it that we don't learn what those principles are and use them to get people to show up? Because we want to change people's behavior. We want to take people who are unmotivated to come to church on a Thursday evening to get to church on a Thursday evening. So if we want to change their behavior, we should understand what motivates their behavior. If I said like, there's this world famous $1 billion speaker coming to speak at our parish. He's passing through. It turns out that his grandma was a part of this parish when she was growing up. And he has a place in his heart for his grandma. And Doris, our parish secretary, made the connection and got it to his assistant. And it turns out that he wants to stop here on Thursday evening and share his secrets to what has made him successful and faithful in his life. And We are. I have tickets that I'm gonna give away for free for 20 minutes after mass only.
Yeah.
And this is, so that's the urgency, that's the scarcity. And then you can say like, and then you can go on this website and you could see like, or there's like all these testimonials. Maybe the priest himself says, this guy changed my life. Like, I can't even tell you, like, this is how I was living before, and I was bored and church meant nothing to me. And then it moved my life so much and it made me the happiest man. So that's social proof. And then social accountability, like you get a couple people on the parish council to like tell their friends that they're going and they want them to go too. And now there's like this urgent, or this, this sort of peer pressure. Okay, now your chances of getting more than 4 people are increasing.
Yeah.
But we're putting into practice these principles not to sell phones, but to get people to come to a talk at church that actually could be meaningful for them in their life. So This is what integration is. The human person is the human person. Why do people do something that seems rare? Why do guys want to date the girl that it seems unattainable?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's part of human psychology.
Yeah.
Right? As soon as somebody's like with somebody, as soon as somebody's like easy to get a date with, then all of a sudden it's like, well, I don't really care about getting a date with that person.
Yeah. It can go that way. Absolutely. And I think, translating this a little bit, what is the, how could we, because a lot of my listeners, a lot of people who might be ingesting this content may not be in the position where they're organizing and they're the leadership of things. But I mean, I think those are great principles in general to apply. But how do we apply it almost even in our own individual lives? Because I see it as that sense of urgency. This is where classically the whole meditation on last things becomes incredibly important. Like
100%. I was just thinking that.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I've actually found great fruit. I'm actually going to be giving a talk on discernment. So it's fascinating. The way you first learn consolation and desolation and the exercises is you're meditating on the fact that you could go to hell for one mortal sin. And you're meditating on the fall of the angels, and you're meditating on heaven and hell and last things. And I have found that incredibly fruitful in spiritual direction, spiritual counseling, and even in my own life, is like to hold before your gaze the last things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, in some of this marketing stuff that I've been sort of self-educating myself on, there's people that are really shady with this stuff. And so they create these websites, for example, that it says like, here's your, discount, 75% off for the next 20 minutes. And then there's like the little countdown timer at the top of the page.
Yeah.
And every time you refresh the page, the countdown timer resets. And it's like, wait a minute. So that we would call that false urgency.
Yeah.
And I was like, why do we need to use false urgency if we have real urgency, if we consider the last things?
Yeah.
Or even just considering the good life.
Yeah.
Like if we're living our life in a way that's burdened, anxious, handicapped, like emotionally handicapped, in a way that's like we're not getting the most out of life that we can. We're literally wasting every moment in that state.
Yeah.
And as soon as you do the thing that's going to help you break out of that state, you're going to say to yourself, why didn't I do this before? Yeah. And you're wasting all this time. That should be the urgency. And at the end of the day, that's the real urgency, is like you only have so many minutes in this life to grow in perfection and grow in union with God, and to like get yourself out of a path going in the wrong direction. Yeah. So like, I'm pretty sure we shouldn't be wasting any one of those minutes. So the countdown ticker is going down and there's no refresh. It's like you have that set amount of hours and minutes on your life, and that's it.
Exactly. And that absolutely. And that's an incredibly important quality that to build in people and to motivate them, which you're right. I mean, I think right now, I mean, I'm planning for next Lent, but last Lent I got all fired up with the Lent. There's something about Lent that actually appeals to Catholics and non-Catholics, but it's a sense of like, this is a time of training. This is a time of discipline, like dig deep. And if you've looked at anything on Catholic social media or whatever, it's like, well, fasting is really hard, guys. Don't go too crazy. Don't go, just take your time, make sure you're hydrated. Yeah, we know it's hard. I was so ticked. I was like, no, I mean, the big thing should be like, this is going to be your best Lent ever. Like, dig deep. Like, don't waste this opportunity. Like, now's the time to act. Extend yourself.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I mean, meanwhile, I'm watching a Nike commercial, and Nike, I mean, every time you watch those commercials, they motivate you, right? Like, you're like, I want to buy the shoes and like go for a run, like up the hill,
That's it. So it's like, it's appreciating and reverencing the human body and psychology that God made us with, and then learning how to use that knowledge to help people move in the right direction. I think that's what's grossly missing from ministry and from the teaching of how to live a faithful life. If we can sort of create those components for ourselves, or, we can have people that create them and lead us into them as well in the church. I think there's shared responsibility on both ends, but across the board it's missing.
Agreed. Well, hey, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's get into our third topic. So you were going to talk about dating and courtship, and I was going to talk about a little bit my quote unquote dating seminary discernment. But do you have any good stories, like dating stories, some wisdom about dating, courtship, things like that?
Yeah. So I guess I would say the first thing, I mean, I could just tell my story.
That's perfect.
And I think that, I think that it's part of this idea of integration. So, the way that I see the world is in the matter of principles or ideas, but boiled down into principles and the way that we live according to those principles. So it's this like head and heart, or spirit and body. It's like the two of these worlds coming together, the both and.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was in grad school, I was in my last year of grad school, and I had dated off and on, but nothing had really panned out. And I was getting ready to graduate from my program in DC and move up to New York. And I was thinking, like, this is my last chance in this area before I leave. If I'm going to meet the right person, maybe I'll just wait till I get to New York, but whatever. So then I decided to do some online dating.
Mm-hmm.
And so I developed a set of principles, of rules to follow. And then I stuck to the rules religiously. Mm-hmm. And by going through this process, I met my wife. Mm-hmm. And I can say that when I met her, I almost immediately knew that I immediately knew this was very different. And I almost immediately after that knew that I was going to marry this woman.
Nice. And
so, but it had to be these like reasoned, rational, logical rules that I then actually put into practice and followed and obeyed. So there's two components to it. Like the set of rules and principles have to make sense, and then you have to be faithful to them. Mm-hmm. And if the rules fit our psychology and fit with how we're made, and we're faithful to those rules, they're going to get us to the goals that we want. In fact, I'm building a whole community around this. Like my next initiative is going to be like the culmination in all this integration stuff at this online community where people can share goals with each other and have coaches to actually set these goals up. But it's going to be based on this concept. We have principles, and then we live life according to them with accountability and with that social accountability where, you have badges and you high five people that are meeting their goals and things like that.
Yeah, the coaching, kind of a coaching system.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. So it's interesting. Some of the ideas you're talking about is actually helping me and clicking in my head a little bit. Is you talked about these rules. I imagine the rules were probably not they were not necessarily universally applicable, but they made sense to you. And we'd had a previous conversation where you talked about Jordan Peterson's whole thing, make your bed every morning. And then that also a military officer talked about that.
Right.
I haven't worried about making my bed. That's just my personality. I don't think but that meant something specifically for him and his audience. And kind of connecting, there was this businessman who he had his business, And in his business, every periodically, there would arise a piece of wisdom within the business, like a saying that he would pass along to. And over time, what they did was they made these into photos and placards around the office, all of these sayings. And it was interesting because there was a story behind all of the sayings.
Oh yeah.
And he would tell, when he was visiting the seminary, he told us the stories behind these sayings and this kind of like collective wisdom of what his company had learned about how to operate and how to do business. And some of them were a little bit goofy or a little bit funny, but there was always like that integration. It was the expression of a lived experience and a collective experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what can be changing people's lives and people's experience in whatever it is that they're doing. If we have like this phrase, this idea, this principle, but it's not just like out there to sort of like debate and to navel gaze and to sort of like get into this like kind of, I think that's the problem with like, that's what Pope Benedict said about theology practiced on the knees.
Yeah.
Like we need to pray first, or philosophers that just like lose themselves in the abstract world of ideas. It's totally dehumanized. Like that's not who we are created to be. That's not how we're created to operate. So when we have the idea, but then it makes sense, like we can taste it. It's palpable. Like we can figure out the story moves the emotion because we connect to the story, to the character, and we want to go through the journey that the character goes through, and we want to get to the place that the character got. So the businessman who came up with those sayings, like if there was somebody that came through giving that talk, it was probably a successful businessman.
Yeah.
It's not going to be the guy who lost it all and now he's wallowing in self-pity. And he's like, oh, here's a saying you should live your life by. You look at this guy and be like, I'm not going to, why would I care what your saying is? Like, I'm going to do the opposite of what you just said. But so you're relating to the human experience of it. And that's how we get motivated.
Yeah. And I've seen some bad examples. There's an element in which all of scripture and theology and all these things, a particular phrase can motivate you in a moment and have a deeper content. I want to actually go back to the principles they use for dating a little bit so that we're not so much in the idea section. But I was once in a spiritual direction. And actually, I hate to be critical of a spiritual director, but I would say this was probably a little bit bad on his part. But I was praying with St. Paul, and it struck me, St. Paul says, live in imitation of me. This is like a phrase that he uses. He says, do what I do. And that's like something I was praying with. And on the surface, my spiritual director said, well, that seems a little egotistical. You shouldn't be pointing to yourself. You should be pointing to Christ. It's like, now I'm starting to realize if I was talking to myself then, it's like, okay, this may sound egotistical, but right now this is helping you to grow and helping you to look inside, like, and helping you to take account of yourself. And there's that element that sometimes scripture can do that, where on the surface, somebody could analyze and critique it one way or another, but for you in that moment, it's leading you to growth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's a place for that. I think there's a place for saying live like I live. Like there's a place for that, definitely. And the thing is, like with humility, we should be able to debate principles.
Yeah.
And that should be part of the process. So when I said like the rules that I came up with were ordered, reasonable principles that I thought through and they were logical. Somebody might come along and say, you know what, here's a great example. In our therapy practice, I've had a rule for myself for a long time that if I see some patients on Skype, I won't see them in the office. Like it's one or the other. Mm-hmm. And I had a really jarring experience where I had somebody that I only see on Skype, and then they came into the office. And for both of us, it was so awkward that we took 2 more sessions after that just to process the experience. And it caught me off guard. And I taught my team, okay, guys, this is what we do. We don't see people in 2 modalities. We pick one or the other. Huh. And then my clinical director brought to me this issue, and he said, some of our therapists were saying like they've had different experiences with that, and they're wondering, should this really be one of our rules? And I said, well, that's a great question, because Skype therapy is brand new, online therapy. Like nobody's teaching this in class. There's no ethics that's like really well taught on it. So a lot of this I'm kind of figuring out as I go along. And he brought that to me. I said, that's a great question. Like, let's talk it out.
Yeah.
So we arrived at a conclusion that maybe there are good cases and good uses for, when we can mix the modality. And so we really have to be paying more attention. It's case by case, But I think that's really important to have the openness to changing the principles. Like we should be able to talk about like, okay, is making your bed an objectively good principle? So like, both of us leave behind our biases. It's like, okay, you don't like doing it. I could take it or leave it personally. I try to when I can. I don't always. But like, let's leave practice apart for a moment and go to the idea. And then we debate the idea and we come up with a conclusion. And then if it is objectively good, then we say, okay, now we're both going to like work to make our lives match the objectively good principle. That's integration.
Agreed. And I would say, even though the principle of making your bed, I don't say like I have to make my bed. Even today I was praying a rosary and the living room was just a little bit messy while I was praying the rosary. I stopped the rosary and just put a bunch of stuff away, and it helped me to be more recollected. There's the deeper principles found within it and how it resonates with your heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what were your actual principles for dating?
I've got a whole
carefully guarded secret, or
I have a PDF rule book actually that I give to my patients when they're in dating state of life. But the basics were, I call it online meeting. It's not online dating.
Yeah. Because
that's really inhuman. You can't really date somebody online. And so they're basically rules of engagement for like, where is the appropriate boundary from meeting to dating? Mm-hmm. And so, so the first step was to say like, the first step was to say that I'm not looking for a yes of this online sort of audience or whatever you want to call it. Like this crowd of women that I'm looking at on their profile pictures. Like, I'm not looking for somebody that I'm like, aha, that's it. That's who I want to date.
Yeah.
I'm looking at people and I'm, looking for a spark, obviously, or whatever. But at the same time, this is only a tool which is useful to help me filter out people that I definitely should not be talking to.
Yeah.
So I say, I'm not looking for a yes. I'm looking for who's not a no.
Gotcha. And
so I'm looking through profiles, and if somebody's like, having the time of my life, dating everybody I want to, like, can't tell me what to do, like, I'm like, okay, next. If somebody's like, I'm a devout atheist, don't try to convince me otherwise. I was like, okay, next. So I was looking for not no, or somebody who's not a no. If I saw a no, I passed on. And then besides that, I was basically initiating contact with like as many people as I could who are not no's.
Yeah.
And then I had a whole set of engagement. So like the rules were like no more than 3 emails back and forth before you get on the phone with somebody. And then no more than 3 phone calls, no longer than 20 minutes before meeting in person. So it's like this stepwise engagement of like meeting somebody. And then, so I wouldn't try to like get to really know a person on email or on the phone. I was really just taking the filtering to the next level. Like, okay, based on your profile, you're not a no. Based on a couple of emails, you're not a no. Based on talking on the phone a couple of times, you're not a no. Okay, this is interesting. Let's meet up for a drink. And then so then I would gauge like, if I had like, basically my intuition, if I was like, well, it's not a no, but I don't really think this is going to go anywhere. It'd be a coffee drink in like the morning or middle of the day. If I was like, I'm really interested in this, it would be like more of a later in the day, early evening, get a drink at a bar or restaurant kind of thing. And then the way that I decided to do it was to give myself an out, because then at some point figure out that it's a no. So then I would start with a drink, and then if that went well, then the idea was I'd be like, hey, you want to get a little appetizer? And then if that went well, it's like, I'm actually kind of hungry. Let's get something to eat. And then if that went well, you could go for dessert. You could go for an after dinner drink. You could go for.
You're kind of analytic, aren't you?
Absolutely. But then I had this whole plan laid out, and I just, it was like a part-time job.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that. Actually, if people viewed their relationships like a part-time job that you have to invest in,
right,
like, that would probably be a better approach to it.
It was amazing because at the same time, like, I was not trying to get anything out of these people besides a good conversation and a drink that I was paying for. Yeah. Like, I wasn't inauthentic. I was just like, I'm just meeting all sorts of people. That's what I would say. Like, I just love meeting people, and I'm just getting to know lots of people. I'm broadening my circle, my social circle. So I literally, on certain occasions, would go from one date to another back to back.
Yeah. And I don't know if I would ever recommend doing this on a regular basis, but a piece of wisdom I learned in middle school and high school, that me and my friends, we're all about girls and meeting girls. And they had a saying that if you were looking for a girlfriend, you would never find one. It was only when you were not looking for a girlfriend anymore, right, that you would find one. And I mean, middle school boys had figured something out of our relationship.
It's true, that's great advice. I don't know where you heard that from. That's pretty.
It was just me and my friends in middle school and high school.
That's good. Like, what I experienced that happened was, because I was going out 2-3 times a week, there's this definite like progression of interior development that happens. Like, in the beginning, I was super anxious. I was super worried about what the girl thought about me. And I was basically just super focused on myself.
Yeah.
And the more I did it, the more comfortable I got with the experience. And then as I became less focused on myself, I became more focused on the other person.
And then your attraction goes through the roof.
Well, or my, I don't want to say repulsion, but my opposite of it. Like, I got to see who they really were quicker.
Yeah.
And I could see if we were going to be able to really meet up. Because, by the way, I was on Match.com. Like, I didn't waste my time on CatholicMatch.com. Like, it was just super weird when I saw it. I was like, I'm not going to match up with somebody because we both have a devotion to Saint Therese. Like, that's not how personalities actually match up. And I'm sure there are people that are happy from Catholic matches. I do know a few couple, but yeah. But I, like, it just wasn't my cup of tea. I went on Match.com. So I had a wider pool and also a lot more people that I just realized, like, no, this is not going to be a synergy. There's no like real complementarity here in our personalities. And I got to see that a lot faster the less I was focused on myself. And that's why I can say when I got to the point where I met my wife, that was 6 months in of this process. Mm-hmm. And like, as soon as she walked into the bar, we were meeting at this bar restaurant in Bethesda, Maryland. As soon as she walked in, I saw her, and I, like, my heart, like, kind of, not in like a butterfly infatuation way, and a kind of like a, oh shoot kind of way. Because I was like, crap, this is different. And then I was kind of nervous, and then, like, we kind of engaged in conversation as the conversation unpacked. Like, my self-focus was not there. And I was, like, really seeing this woman. And I was noticing the way she was listening to me, and the way she was engaged with me, and the way she was, like, engaged with the waiter, and the way that she, like, just, like, she had this freedom in the conversation. And there was all sorts of beautiful things that were happening there. And I was, like, picking up on all of it.
Yeah. And I would say that's a good metaphor for life, though. You talked about when you're not so focused on yourself, you're looking out at the world and you're looking out at other people.
Yeah.
Which I would say when you're doing your time in solitude, you're doing your time in prayer, you're doing your introspection, you're overcoming yourself.
Right.
So when you go out into the world, instead of focusing, I have noticed that with successful people or people that are really like, because I've worked a lot with the top 1%. Whether it be businessmen, different things. I've just gotten to know a lot of those people. and they are always looking out at other people. They're always reading other people more, and they're less focused about themselves. Generally speaking, the people I've talked with, and that's just a powerful dynamic. That when you have that freedom interiorly,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
which,
It's amazing.
and I would say to a lot of people, if you're struggling with dating and things like that, maybe it's some of that you need to work through some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why having the rules created safety, so that even though I wasn't formed enough yet to know myself enough and to be able to really know other people, the rules created the structure that got me to where I needed to be. It's very similar to my story in the Friars. Like, the Friars have a set rules of formation. And there's postulancy for 6 months. Then there's novitiate for a year. And then there's 3 years of temporary vows renewed on an annual basis before 4.5 at the minimum years later, you make final vows. So you have to just go through the process. And then guess what? If you do it faithfully, it works. You discern the vocation. You figure it if it's for you or not. I figured it out in that time frame of temporary vows, and I just did not renew my vows when I figured out it was wrong for me. I went through this process of dating, which was reasoned and logical and ordered, and I got through with my own stuff. I got to see clearly the other person, and then finally the right person came along, and it's beautiful. It was 7 years ago. We have 5 kids. Life is amazing. I couldn't imagine being happier than I am.
That's awesome.
But living according to these rules makes a difference.
Absolutely. That's good. It's the golden stuff, man. All right, let's get into the next part. I think it's a good transition, a good way to conclude that segment. Parenting, and I'm going to talk about leadership, parenting. I think it's all interconnected, actually. How your parents treated you is how you treat your kids, but also how your leadership style, how you understand authority. I mean, it's so funny. I mean, that seems so obvious. I'm sure to me and you, it's like we've done this long enough that it's like, yeah, your parents have a huge impact in how you view authority and things like that. How would you say, what's your role as a leader, as a parent? Do you have any stories or any golden nuggets from?
Well, I think the underlying theme of everything we've been talking about is that we carry the baggage of our history and the imprinted dynamics, relational dynamics that we're raised with. But we're not determined by them. And so we have to go through a process, as long or as short as it takes, to uncover what those unconscious dynamics and patterns are, and then be free to discard the things that are actually not going to work for you. So in my life, I spoke about this earlier. My parents divorced when I was 17. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in a family that family was the priority. We were Catholic, but that was a second place to the family. Mm-hmm. And then my parents basically pulled out the rug from underneath us and kind of showed us this whole thing has been a big sham. It's all a lie. Family is not the most important thing. Our family certainly is not. So they're ending the marriage. And then I go off to college, and then I have a huge reversion. And then I realize that I want to integrate psychology with the faith. Mm-hmm. And I also start discerning religious life. When I get into the Friars, my family took it really hard. And my dad especially. And, through a series of difficult times in those first 6 months, basically ended up having to totally separate from my family. And if anybody's familiar with the life of St. Francis, he went through a similar journey where he was raised in luxury and wealth and nobility. And then he had a conversion, and then his father was like, you're crazy. And then Francis stole from his father, and I never stole from my dad, but the father brought Francis to the bishop, and then the bishop told me he had to give the stuff back. And Francis said, here's your stuff. In fact, here, you can have the clothes off my back, because you're no longer my father. The Father in heaven is my father. And I had to go through that transition as well, where I had to like be disowned from my family in order to heal the wounds of what had been misformed and miseducated in me from my family. And I think that that's one of the greatest blessings and graces in my life is that I had the chance to do that in such a deep and radical way, instead of making that be a prolonged experience over like 10 years or 20 years. Like that's where most people are really suffering in their marriages and their parenting. It's like they're still working out how to let go of the wounds that their parents passed on to them.
Even successful. I talk about this a lot with people in spiritual direction, and is if you could treat your parents like you would a stranger, you'd actually be a lot nicer in some situations. You'd actually be a lot nicer to them,
right?
A lot more understanding.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, since once there's more of that story with my family. Afterwards, I like reconciled with my dad, and we have a beautiful relationship now. I don't agree with a lot of the things that he says or does, but I don't have this kind of filial need for him to validate me, where I'm actually hurt by the things that are off base. So I have like my identity and who I am and who my real father is. And then I can take the good, because my dad still gives me a lot of great dad things.
Yeah.
But not 100% in a way that I don't have to like be on guard or filter or evaluate or anything like that. And so when there's something that I'm like, that's not quite right, I can accept that. I can love him. I can still be there. Like you said, like you could treat a stranger better than somebody that you're still like emotionally attached to with these ties and these wounds. So it's an awesome thing to really progress through that. And then to find that you can be free from the miseducation that we receive. I talk about the family, like the church calls it a school of love. And in most cases, we're miseducated in the school of love that we're raised with. So we have to go through a process of re-education. Once we learn that there's a better source of truth to apply ourselves to, then we can go back and again, accept the things that were good, reject the things that were bad, and still have good relationships.
And I have a theory, even so my situation, a lot of stuff I've had to work through wasn't huge ways like faults of my parents. But I think everybody has to encounter the reality. At some point when you're a kid, you encounter the fact that your parents are capable of evil, that your parents are capable of sin, or you encounter the fact that there's sin in the life of your parents. And I think that there's a sense that always startles you. That always, like, you have to undo that. You have to recognize that your parents are capable of evil. I think even Jordan Peterson gets into, you have to come, he says, in adulthood, and I had to come to this place, you have to come to the maturity that authority and your parents are just as fallible as you, that they can make mistakes. And yet there's a certain, you have to recognize, and I'm trying to think how I would say in my own life, where I had to recognize that my parents had one opinion among many. My bishop has one opinion among many. They may be right some of the time. They may be wrong some of the time. And just being okay with that. I'm not sure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And that's really hard. Like when you get into, especially with the church, and then you have a bishop, it's like, wow, like that's really deep. And that's almost, in some ways, it's almost more intense than a father of your family, because now we're talking about your spiritual identity. But if you go into that, it's like, well, yeah, that emotional vulnerability is going to be there, and you have to accept that. So it's true, because we're born into a state of total dependency, and the only concept that we have of God is our parents. So, but we still have this innate sense that we're made for perfection, out of perfection. So we expect to be loved with perfection, and any slight misstep is a wound. And that, like I have so many patients that like, they have a hard time accepting that they're going to be looking at the imperfections of their parents in the process of therapy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, listen, we gotta cover this right up front. we're not here to just spend all of our time blaming our parents. We're here to illuminate where there's been a miseducation. And just to like level the playing field here, as a father of 5 children, I can tell you, I promise you, that I'm wounding my children.
Yeah.
And I pray every night as I bless them for St. Joseph to be in their lives and correct the errors of my fatherhood and make up for all the things that I'm doing to miseducate my children in the school of love. Yeah. So like, I accept that about myself. It's a part of everybody's story. Unless your parents are literally Mary and Joseph, you're not being raised in the perfection of Jesus. So we have to like put light on that and figure out where that miseducation, that malformation has taken place. This is why the spiritual life has to be incarnate. It has to be integrated. We are uniting ourselves to a human being named Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
A divine being, but in his humanity. And we're uniting ourselves to this person, Jesus, who was raised in his humanity by a human mom, a human dad in a perfect way so that his humanity was perfect. We have imperfect humanity. It needs to be remolded, reformed. Our old hearts have to be replaced by new hearts. We have to decrease so that he might increase. That's the union with Jesus. And it's not just a spiritual reality.
Yeah.
It's going to be our humanity.
Absolutely. And as a parent and as a leader, is building in a recognition that you will fall and building that in your organization, building that in your family. Like, so instead of, if you're a parent, like let's say you're a young parent and you don't say, I hope I never let my kids down. I hope I never do anything that hurts my kids. A better reaction would be, what am I going to do when I hurt my kids or when I let my kids down?
Yeah.
How am I going to handle that? And then as a leader, like, so I have these focused missionaries coming in. We're all excited. It's going to be great. And I told them, I said, there's going to be a problem sometime within the next, especially if we're successful. I said, chances are, I believe what's going to happen is you're going to be successful. You're going to have a multiplying effect. And there's going to be some problem that arises because of that. And I was like, just be prepared for it. Like, prepared. At some point, we're going to have a disagreement. There's going to be a crisis. There's going to be a tension, and just be prepared for it. Don't expect things to be perfect. Like, and kind of building that into your thinking.
Absolutely. It takes that initial humility. It takes a desire for transparency and self-awareness. So like, you have to be willing to put in the time. You have to be willing to turn towards the things that are really uncomfortable, because looking at yourself is really uncomfortable when you're thinking, especially about your imperfections. And then there's that humility of acceptance of like, yeah, I'm going to make a mistake. And it's not even just like, what am I going to do? That's got to be part of it in the beginning. But then like the answers are pretty static. It's like, well, we have to acknowledge our mistakes. We have to apologize for our mistakes. We have to seek reconciliation and forgiveness. So the ongoing problem is a daily awareness. It's like the examine. Like every evening we should be thinking about, how did I mess up today?
Yeah.
And assuming that you messed up.
You say that that's obvious. Those 4 things you mentioned, you kind of rattle off. Maybe if you talked, like, I've had some people that I wish they would have realized those things. And it takes a mature ego, a mature person to be able to do those things, to admit you're wrong, to ask for forgiveness. There's tons of people I know that will never do those things under any circumstances.
And that's where, I threw the word out there, but it's not an easy word, humility. Like,
yeah,
this is the thing, like humility has to be part of the picture. And humility is not like, I think people don't understand humility. Like, humility is acceptance of our imperfections.
Yeah.
And it's acceptance of what is. Like, I do some things great and I do some things terribly. And like, I remember recently I had an argument with my brother, and we hadn't seen each other in a while. So we were together in the same room, and it kind of escalated. Yeah. And at one point we were like yelling at each other. Mm-hmm. And he's like, what? He said something like, look at how you're talking to me right now. That's not appropriate. you think this is okay to be talking to me? And I'm like, no, it's not okay for me to be talking to you like this. I am not acting appropriately right now. I am sorry. I need to calm down. I'm going to walk out of this room and take a breath. like, like, I walked out of the room and I took a couple breaths and I got myself together and I sat down, and he's like, I do not want to fight like that anymore. And I'm like, neither do I. And he's like, boy, are you just calm now all of a sudden? And I was like, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I need a few more breaths, but I'm getting there right now. And it's like just raw awareness and authenticity. Like, I'm a psychologist. Like, this is my professional life. This is my expertise. And I'm not getting it right all the time. When I'm talking to my family, my brother, my wife sometimes, my kids sometimes, I make mistakes.
Absolutely.
So, like, it's such a waste of time to pretend like that's not true.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like, a lot of people are just wasting their time.
Yeah, and if you just own it, and then you can start to build in and work on it, and also build around yourself that accountability, because that's the building that accountability around you, because that's one of the big things I've realized to try to nurture in organizations. What I've found as a leader, and a lot of times, is I never get feedback the way I want it or when I want it. And like, even starting to cultivate gratitude, though, like your initial impression is gratitude. Because I very rarely, it's like, you'll get somebody who'll come in and I get a lot of people, not a lot of times, but particularly when I preach difficult conversations or preach difficult concepts, sometimes the feedback you'll get, in a way, it's like person will trigger some of your insecurities. And it's like, you have to work against that. Like, you have to show that gratitude and build that in. But it's so fascinating. That self-knowledge piece. Cool. Well, I'm running out of steam. We're at an hour. Yeah, this is a good conversation. We got to do this again. I enjoy it every time, man. And well, thanks for giving me some of your time, Greg. And
yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure. I'd love to do it again soon.